Hello, Mark. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to start off with the simple, basic, and hopefully easy to understand Peacekeeper Training Module 1. Good morning.
Morning.
I use the word basic and keeping it simple because, I mean, today we are going to talk about the basic rights that we all have. We know that the majority of people who want to become peacekeepers have probably had a quick look at the law and thought, ooh, that's very, very intense, but we are going to do our best to simplify it. And as we know, our training is exactly that. We start with simple training, move to an intermediate level, and then an advanced level. So, Mr. Horn, tell me, what are my basic human rights?
Yeah, well, we'll cover 6 topics. My body belongs to my mind. My body's words and actions are lawfully guided by my conscience. And we'll be talking about conscience a lot through the whole course. There's no reason to be in society if there is no rule of law. The law must be knowable to all. And then we'll briefly look at the course itself, which is breach of peace is a trespass on another's rights. So we'll talk about that a bit. And then we'll give an introduction to removing the threats of arrest, the use of force, search and detention, which are the main tools being used to deter people from expressing their rights.
Just so that you know, your microphone is not too great today, Mark. I don't know if there's anything you can do.
Just try and sit a little bit closer.
Oh, that's better.
Okay.
That's better. Yep. You previously sound like you're in an outside toilet. Good. Over to you then. Let's make a start.
Right. We'll start with my body belongs to my mind, which sounds very obvious. Now, I use the word creator, and it's whatever you believe the creator to be. So it's no particular preferences to anything, whatever your belief is. And basically, we've been gifted a mind by our creator, and it's been gifted to us. Therefore, we cannot gift it away, nor can it be taken away by another without the creator's authority. And this essentially means your body belongs to your mind. And this extends as well that your children or your offspring are your legal property. And that includes, for purposes of education, absolutely everything to do with them until their marriage or the age of 18. The creator, though, does retain protection of our body for the fight or flight instinct, the survival instinct, which we're all very familiar with. And that there allows you to use force to protect your body. And you will have what's called lawful excuse, which will be detailing what that means later. However, with the use of force, it can only be used if you're under imminent attack. That there automatically entitles us all to shelter from the environment, clean air to breathe, nutritious food to eat, clean water to drink. Thereafter, once we've met the basic needs of survival, which those are, then the Creator gave us observational tools, so our eyes, our ears, etc. And additionally gave us logic and reason to make sense of everything that we observe. I
get the feeling that this is going to lead to the point that we all know the difference in right and wrong, don't we?
Absolutely, and we'll be getting there. But this here, firstly, importantly, is the freedom of speech. This is a natural right which allows our mind to express physically our thoughts. And that is very different though from disparaging other people, i.e. attacking people with your words rather than attacking ideas and concepts with your words. Also, it leaves us knowledge from generations past. The logic and reason, because everything is built on previous knowledge and previous experience, And this is very important. And when we get onto talking about equity, you'll see that there's a lot of knowledge that is passed down through generations, and this actually belongs to everybody until somebody can prove otherwise. Finally, the important thing really though is my body's words and actions are lawfully guided by my conscience. This is what some people call the sixth sense. It's the creator's will, which we can actually feel. And conscience is expressed as the rules of equity. And conscience, therefore, is what gives us the self-determination to live our lives according to one simple principle, which is not to knowingly do another harm. So we'll be referring back to that and looking in much more detail about equity and conscience and how important it is in our lives. It's pretty obvious, the next one really, there's no reason to be in society if there is no rule of law. Without the rule of law, it just simply becomes the law of the jungle. However, humans need other people. This survival requires more than one. And this here fundamentally always boils down to what can be called natural law, the creator's law, law of creation, universal law. It's known by many, many different things, and expressed specifically in regards, we're all familiar with physical laws of science. About people's actions, it's known as the rules of equity, and fundamentally stems from my word is my bond. When I interact with other people, I express myself. Where I don't express myself, things are assumed based upon customs. But when I give my word and create a bond, I'm creating duties, rights, and obligations. And this here expressed really goes back very, very long time. For duties, rights, and obligations to have what's called the force of law, it means it's not only about me expressing my views and what I will bond myself to. It needs to be a full explanation with the person that I'm interacting with. And once we all are clear on our relative, on our specific duties, i.e. each person's rights and obligations, then we can choose to consent. And when we write it down, that writing is the legally enforceable contract, which we're all familiar with. The basic law, though, for general living in society must be knowable to all, as opposed to what I've just explained. You and I individually need to consent. So the knowable law to all must be observable to us all. And we're all very, very familiar with this. And the first one is ignorance of the law is no excuse. What that's saying is natural law will always prevail. And therefore natural law is what true sovereignty is. And when we get further down this list, you'll see that sovereignty actually is the search for truth. It's not people, it's not you, it's not me, it's not a government minister, it's nobody except for the search of truth. The second one that we're all familiar with is all are equal under the law. Simply, what that means is there is no such thing as privileges under law. And what you can do, I can do. What anybody can do, we all can do. So there are no privileges at all under the law. Next one is no one is above the law. Now what this means is there is no such thing as immunity. Each of us is accountable for the harm that we've caused. The fourth one, the law operates without fear or favor. this is the due process of law. What will the events that set off the sequence of consequences will happen, irrespective of what people believe. The next one's a very obvious one, but needs to be really reinforced. To lie is to go against the mind. Going back to the previous example that I've given, when we create rights, duties, and obligations to one another, we must have a meeting of the minds, a full understanding of what we're actually committing ourselves to and bonding ourselves to. And that's called consent. So lawfully, consent means a meeting of the minds, i.e. full disclosure, no hidden small print. And the last one, which is really the basis of much of what we'll be teaching, is the concept of innocent until proven guilty. Very, very simply, the claimant must prove their case. It's not up to us to disprove somebody else's case. So that's sort of the general basics of the law and the rights and where they come from. Now, these nobody can take away from us. They're what's called inalienable is the big word. But nobody can remove these from us except for the Creator. So,
if I could just say a couple of things there, Mark. First of all, as you know, we've had to re-record this part one of the training module because sadly, due to technology, it didn't upload on the first time around. So that's probably why I've got a different coloured jumper on, because yesterday we recorded them both with the same colour jumper on. But you mentioned obviously there about freedom of speech. The reason why I'm bringing that subject up is in part two. We actually said we'd forgot to include it in part one. Yes. Well, obviously you did mention freedom of speech. That'd be quite confusing to others, but you probably also want to touch on the fact the knowledge provided to us and the truth of information given to us by our predecessors.
Yeah, it's extremely important. And just to go a bit further into detail with that, nothing that we create is absolutely novel. It's always built upon previous knowledge. And without that previous knowledge, fundamentally, all that we're doing is tinkering with the corners, I think the saying goes, however it goes. But we're just making incremental updates to existing knowledge, as opposed to a radical, absolute, on its own, standalone, new knowledge that we bring forward, a new creation. So it's very important that we understand this concept of once a person dies, the question becomes, at that point, until somebody can bring the Creator in, nobody has specific rights over that to derive benefit from that, because it's society itself that allowed that specific knowledge to evolve that little incremental bit.
And I think the other two important points you mentioned there as well is one is regarding contracts, written contracts. Contracts can be verbal as well, can't they? Correct. If you agree something, then you have actually made a verbal contract with another individual.
Correct. In essence, it's a promise. Both parties simply promise one another to do something.
And I'm sure we covered this in the introduction, but I can't remember now because it was 3 days ago. But the whole purpose is helping people to gain confidence here, not just in their rights, but in their ability to stand up to anybody else who's breaching their peace. And therefore, you know, it's so important that we remind people that no one is above you, not on the fact that no one's above the law, but people who are so-called law enforcement agents at the moment, they are not above you. And as you say, what they can do, you can do. And using minimum amount of force, if they're aggressive towards you, you can be aggressive back. But not that we're condoning that, because we're peacekeeping people, but peace-loving people. But it is important that people realise that just because a person is wearing a uniform, they may feel and act that they're in an elevated position. They're not. They're actually in the same, if not a lower state position, because they are paid a salary to uphold the law on behalf of who's appointed them. Whereas you, as a member of the general public, is, you know, we've had this conversation many times, is your rights. You are free to do anything that you want to do as long as you cause no harm to others.
Absolutely, and that day when we discuss equity, you'll see exactly where that all comes from. Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned the breach of peace, and we'll be looking at that next. Basically, a breach of peace is what's in the common law known as a trespass upon anybody's right to go about their private lives peacefully. And like you've said, peacefully means not to knowingly cause harm. So essentially, before anybody breaches another person's peace, they must have a very good reason to do this. And that's what's called lawful excuse. And in the courts, you'll, if you're familiar with it, it's called a cause of action. And basically, there's two elements, and two elements only, two main elements, and we'll talk about contracts, but I'll add that in. The two main elements is harm's been caused to another, and the second one is there's an intent to harm someone else. So that's basically through making threats. And the third one is a breach of contract. If you've undertaken something, you will be causing harm to another because they're not getting what they get expected. So the important thing with the breach of peace is at the time of breaching another's peace, and I'll keep on coming back to this, that they need to show the reason for breaching that peace. And that means they need to be able to explain it and show you the evidence if they want to breach your peace. They cannot collect the evidence afterwards. And this is so important, and especially when we talk now, go on to removing the threat of arrest, search, detention, and the use of force. It's so important. In advance, they must have the evidence with them. Otherwise, you cannot breach another's peace. And fundamentally, this means that we all have an inalienable right to lawfully go about our life following our conscience without unlawful interference from others. Fundamentally, it's known as the King's Peace. We used to traditionally be known as the King's Peace, but we'll see this in a very, very old concept. It's not anything new. So again, specifically, it's what we're trying to teach people is to hold others to account for their behaviors. And most specifically, it's to hold public officials to account. So we'll look finally at to remove the threat of arrest, force, search, and detention. So back to the basics. Common decency is if I approach somebody, I introduce myself, I identify myself, and give some idea of the interaction. So with this, if it's a police officer, basically they need to state their name and address. And it's very, very simple, because if they're acting unlawfully, then I need to know where I can serve a claim against them to hold them to account. Then, as I said, on the breach of peace, they must state the reason for breaching your peace. This applies to absolutely every unwanted interaction. If they fail to give you a reasonable ground, i.e. a cause of action, then you're free to walk away. If they do give reasonable grounds, then equally, if they can show you that it looks like you've caused harm, you need to tell them where they can serve any claims should they choose to continue down that road. So we strongly recommend that you have some way of verifying it, because that is one reason that they may detain you to establish your name and address. Now, to make use of force, we can very simply remove this threat. And the way that we remove this threat is we simply hold our hands up, step back, only one step back, and say, I will comply with your commands under duress. And therefore, you have no lawful excuse to lay a finger upon me. With those words, what we're doing is making it absolutely clear they have no lawful reason to lay a finger on you. And should they, that then would be the unlawful use of violence. So they've got no excuse, for instance, to handcuff or push or do anything to you. But you now have created a contract. You've given your word to your bond. Should you not comply with their commands, then you've given them now excuse to use force. Further, if they want to search you, they must state in advance, again, they must give you a reason for their actions, what they expect to find. They also would need to give the legal authority to search you. And they must provide you with all the information relating to the search and the record of the search. If they find nothing, you're not required to give them your name. So the only exception with giving your name is for a search. However, does this stop them arresting you? No, not necessarily. They do what they want very often. And as we'll see, this often is just simply because they're following orders and do not understand the law themselves, the basics of law. The first check and balance comes in when you present it to the custody officer, who then must do the specific tests that he must do to ensure that your arrest has actually been lawful. They often use the excuse to detain people. So with the arrest, they like to use the handcuffs to threaten and intimidate people. To detain you, they will use the excuse that you must give your name and address. That's the first excuse they'll use. However, before the arrest, if you've given the name and address, they have no reason to arrest you because they know where they can serve their papers. So the second excuse they use is that they need to question you. So with the rights that they read to you, you have the right to remain silent and to legal representation. If you cannot afford one, the state will provide one. So in this regards, be very clear, I do not want legal representation and insist you interview me now. The reason for that is quite simple. If there is no legal representation, no state representation available, you've now made a request for state representation or legal representation. They will abide by your request and detain you until it arrives. And so you've automatically put yourself into a position there where you'll be detained. Once they've got your name and address and the interview starts, simply say, you have my name and address and can lawfully serve me any claim you may believe you have against me, to which I will respond accordingly. The excuse will often be, we need to secure evidence, and therefore you say, please state what evidence you believe you must secure or is in my possession, and unless you can do so, you have no lawful excuse to continue detaining. So we've removed their second major excuse to continue with detaining you. When they continue asking any questions then, you simply say, I stand on my rights to remain silent And as stated, once you have provided your questions or claim, I will respond accordingly. I'm innocent until proven guilty, and as claimant, you must prove your claim. Now, this is important because with the way they question, they try and get you to self-incriminate. And so what you're doing here is saying, give it to me in writing, you know where to send it, and I will respond, and that way you're not under duress and you can do it in your own time and peace without any threats of fear or intimidation. So those are the main tools that you can use to control the use of unlawful detention, unlawful arrest, and the unlawful use of force by people of authority who really know very little about their actual rights, duties, and obligations.
And I think it's fair to say at this point, Mark, that none of our peacekeepers have ever been arrested. This information is that you can provide support to other people that have been unlawfully arrested. You and I have tried to get arrested many times, haven't we? But they just don't seem to. They don't seem to want to. They don't want to try out their experience on us, do they?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and just with these simple basics, and with a peacekeeper, these little things, every single little thing that you do, first you need the knowledge, that gives you the confidence, and then the confidence, and when you see other people doing it as well, that will start to give you the courage. And this is all simply about the rule of law, upholding the rule of law, and holding people to account, to live in peace. Right, that's it then for the intro and basics on law.
Yep, absolutely. And I look forward to seeing you shortly on part 2.
Okay, see you shortly.
Yep, thanks, Mark.
Thanks.